This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where it's a great pleasure to interview once again Dr. Katherine Horton, who's been a targeted individual subjected to an unbelievable array of electronic forms of harassment and even manipulation. Her entire body appears to have been chipped, where even a bystander on the street can induce physiological reactions as she passes by within a certain distance. Katherine, I can't believe what you've been through. I'm not only so grateful to have you here as my guest, but to notice that you've been doing other interviews with other outlets for quite a while, which I think is tremendously to the good because it's so important your story get out to the public.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me on, because today is the 26th of December. So during particularly intensely, and I know that very many of them are alone. So it always helps to reach out and for them to know that things are happening in the background and we are working to shut these crimes down. So thank you very much.
And my understanding is over holidays, they can intensify their attacks, and that this past Christmas has been no exception.
That's right, yes. So for those people who are new, there are two attack modes. One of them is really the firing of directed energy weapons at a victim. And this can happen through the walls of a home because standard microwave weapons alone pass through the, a normal wall at 50% intensity. So if somebody doubles the intensity, it's like being microwaved in your own home and you're defenseless. So on the one hand, we have these directed energy weapons. And then on the other hand, pretty much all the victims I know are also implanted. So these are chip implants, but also nanotech implants, and they can be used to cause pain, to cause heating, and cause another plethora of physiological effects, but also, for example, the cramping or sudden relaxation of muscles and stuff like that. So what we are looking at is really a modern society where a very large fraction has been bio-robotized and can be accessed by remote control for the purposes of torture, rape, or general harassment, and or be completely disabled. So
I believe the reason why you are, in particular, such an exceptional witness to these events is because by virtue of your scientific background, your education, your training, your intelligence, you turn out to be an unwitting or involuntary participant observer in these social behavior manipulation experiments that are being conducted by the deep state in both the USA, the UK, and elsewhere around the world. It's a shocking story. And frankly, most Americans, for example, would find it bewildering to even to have a description of what you've been going through, because they would think it was on the order of science fiction or science fantasy. But the fact is that the technology exists to induce precisely the kinds of manipulative, harassing behaviors to which you've been subjected, and it's an astonishing but true story. One of the cases where truth is indeed stranger than fiction.
Absolutely. It has to be remembered that these weapons have been developed decades ago. So, for example, there were very prominent cases recently in 2016 and 17 of diplomats, US diplomats being attacked with these weapons. And one set was diplomats in Cuba, and the other set was US diplomats in China. And in both cases, I think the doctors first the media put out that it was maybe a sonic attack, and then later on, the Swiss media recently put out that it is possibly mass psychosis, whatever the hell that is. But in actual fact, in both cases, the doctors found that these people actually suffered brain damage, and that the most likely candidate were microwave weapons. So this is now in the years 2016 and 17, but already in the 1970s, the US Embassy in Moscow was irradiated with microwave weapons. So we are talking 48 years after these attacks, or over 40 years after the attacks. And during that time, microwave weapons not just continued to exist, they were They were basically advanced. The entire research and development was taken secret. So, for example, Dr. Barry Trower, a British microwave expert, says that up until I think the mid-70s, it was perfectly fine to openly talk about research into microwave weapons, but then the British government classified the entire research and it went dark. And I think that was precisely the point where they discovered that these microwave weapons are so powerful when it comes to influencing the human brain. And I think what happened in those 40 to 50 years of secret development is that they experimented with miscellaneous influencing technologies, and also what I call remote controlled, brain lobotomy, microwave lobotomy. So now it seems they're trying to behavior modify humans by literally damaging parts of their brain. And they're trying to control people. One of the things I observed, they were trying to control and manipulate my husband at night. So I would wake up in the middle of the night, he would be in absolute agony. And then when I was trying to find out what's happening with him, I discovered I can't wake him up. He is absolutely groaning and moaning in pain. And when I put my hand on his head, I realized I'm reaching into an agonizingly painful microwave beam that's directly aimed at his head. And it seemed to come from one of our neighbors. So that seems to be some kind of, human experimentation, human influencing. And typically, and what's happening to many, many victims, and what is also the case with me, I've got ear implants that can be used as a kind of walkie-talkie. So I can be sent audio commands. Now, there are certain victims who are being blasted with audio communication 24/7, and it's a method of psychological disintegration. So these agents would be using mass surveillance information from phone calls, their laptop, which can be surveyed, and anything, and even indoor surveillance, to kind of give these people a live commentary about their life and trying to disconcert them, hurl abuse at them, and so on and so on. Now, there's one class of victims that has this so-called voice to skull 24/7. And there's another class of victims that has exactly the same ear implants that allow this telecommunication, but they're not aware of it. And I'm in this latter category, so I do not have voice to skull. However, once an agent actually did give me an audio command, and it literally sounds like it was a man. I've never heard his voice before, but it sounds like you have headphones in. So suddenly, in one ear, I had the perfectly clear announcement, and he said, "Get up and open the door." And moments later, I heard my husband arrive home, and I really could hear his his keys in the door. So this was something that only a person who was watching him and me could have, brought about. And that's when I realized, oh, indeed, I do have these ear chips. Now, the reason why it's really important for the victims to know how it's done is because once it's broken down to the individual elements of deception and what technology is being used, it's much easier to understand, So for a very long time, the what I call the pseudoscience of psychiatry, they have put out this notion that hearing voices is some sort of mental aberration. In actual fact, as a physicist and systems analyst, I personally find it physically impossible for a chemical imbalance or for a disease to create some sort of effect in the brain that equates to exactly the language spoken, perfect grammar, and full sentences that just mysteriously happen to match up with trauma-based mind control scripts. So this is impossible. So what we're dealing with is agents who have implanted a modern day hearing device and are sending audio transmissions and whatever the hell they like, conversations, abuse, other sound effects, all this sort of stuff. It's very easy to understand. But once you know that these are the key elements, it's also easy to understand what these people are doing. And I think in the case of my husband, they did some sort of aversion training. So they cause intense headaches by microwave irradiation. I mean, already the pain in the bone is already substantial when these microwave weapons are hitting. But then it can be combined with audio transmissions and certain scripts that would be repeated perhaps in his dream. Because I did notice that his personality changed. He suddenly said and seemed to think he remembered things that never happened. And there was some sort of brain work done on him. And eventually it led to the breakup of our marriage. But this is, I know for sure that this is one thing that they are doing.
Well, I was going to ask whether he survived these attacks and whether he were a source of emotional, physical support for you. But since, in fact, it led to the dissolution of your marriage, did you have specific conversation about what was going on? Do you believe he understood? Did he have the intellectual background, the scientific understanding you possess of what was taking place to him?
Yeah, so he was a theoretical physicist. So he also had a PhD from Oxford, but in theoretical particle physics, whereas I'm an experimental particle physicist. So he understood very well, but I think at first he couldn't believe it. And then he was just overwhelmed. He just wanted to get out of the entire situation. However, so while he did get out and, we are separated and we are getting a divorce, I also have evidence that his family was attacked, just like my family was attacked as well. So it's very, very difficult. And this is why I'm saying I know that many other victims are in exactly the same situation. And you have kind of this choice of, just letting people go and not talking about this. But I think it's a very short-term strategy. These people have to face up to what's going on because they have to protect their individual families as well, So my understanding now, after having researched this as an investigator for over a year and a half now, is that, well, from the many, many victim cases that I'm aware of, I can tell victims that it's not just one person who's being attacked. It's not even entire families. It's entire social circles. So you might not realize, but your friends might be attacked, your relatives, even distant relatives might be attacked. It's one program. And even pets are attacked. Actually, pets are the first ones to be killed off often because they want to induce trauma, they want to calibrate the weapons and stuff like that. So the typical victim case will have electromagnetic weapon assaults pretty much 24/7. Then, depending on the experimental program, they would either have chip torture, so heating and pain of chips, or they would have voice to skull. Some people have both. They would report about the strange illness of pets and eventually the death of pets, then also the strange illness and eventual death of relatives or family members, and so on and so on. And typically, they also have financial sabotage, car sabotage. These crimes are so all-encompassing. We have never, ever seen anything like that before on this scale.
Elizabeth, do you believe that these attacks on your husband were intended to separate you so he wouldn't continue to be in a position to support you emotionally, physically, and in other ways? Or do you believe he was simply independently being attacked, in which case I would expect they would continue to this day, even though you're now separated and no longer living together? Have the attacks continued on him to this day?
I can't tell because he himself wasn't aware. I think he was attacked at night, but during the day he wasn't aware of attacks as I was. I really don't know. That's the issue. I think, well, to be absolutely honest, I think we were both attacked, or we were both implanted at the University of Oxford. So one of the things I can show in a moment is an entire book about chips that was written, also showing images of chips that were operated out of victims, written by Dr. Hildegard Stanninger. And in the introduction, in the second paragraph, she says that the leading universities into these so-called artificially intelligent medical devices are the universities of Warwick, Oxford, and Nottingham. Now, I was at Oxford and so was my husband. And when we first got together, I did see and find some little device in his lower thigh that was just under the skin. And when I took it out, I realized, well, now I would recognize it as a shell, as a pellet shell, as a delivery device for a chip implant. So this is when we first got together. And I think he was, independently of me, already a human experimentation subject. And I think...
What was his reaction to your discovery of this device and removal from his thigh?
Well, he just said, "Oh, it's nothing. Forget about it." And it looked like almost like, well, those people who do hunting for guinea fowl, you sometimes see the shot, this little pellets. Sometimes you even find them in guinea fowl if you have it as a meal. Well, it was just that size, and at first I thought, is that really a little lead pellet from these shots? And then when I took it out, I realized it's extremely hard, but it's perfectly light. So, and it was kind of hollow inside and had a little opening. Now that is an extremely odd device, you know, to find in a person, embedded in his skin. So this was really something that was some form of modern technology. And since then I discovered that these chips are also delivered sometimes literally by shooting. It's called RFID sniper rifles. So people can be sniped as they're walking down the street, and then would end up with, depending on where they're shot, you know, with a chip embedded in their shoulder or their neck and so on. So these things do exist.
It would just feel like a minor sting or...
Yeah, pretty much, yes. It does feel like either suddenly your muscles, you know, twitch or have some sharp pain for no reason. That's exactly what it feels like. I was shot like that in Zurich, walking down the street. And when I turned around, the guy just pulled something out of the bushes, threw it in the car, and just made off. And it looked richly like an elongated gun type of device. So,
fascinating, fascinating. Do you think it has anything to do whatsoever with the fact you're both in particle physicists, he as a theoretical particle physicist, you as an experimental? Do you believe it's at all related?
No, I don't think so. And that's for the reason that I also have heard of two lawyers at Cambridge who became victims. They were undergraduates. One victim is known to be a victim of gang stalking and harassment by her Oxford tutors, who started doing all sorts of what I call cartel signaling. So odd spelling and odd behavior during lectures and all types of targeting. And the other person is an undergraduate who the newspapers reported about at Cambridge, I think also studying law. And in her case, they placed rubber ducks in her room, and then increasingly these rubber ducks were mutilated, and it became very, very strange. But that is typical for these intelligence agencies. That's exactly what they do, this sort of psychological terrorism.
Returning to your point about the Psychiatric Association claiming that sounds of voices are a psychiatric symptom, it seems to me there are only two alternative explanations. Either technology for harassment and manipulation has just greatly exceeded the curve, their learning curve, and their reports about psychiatric phenomena haven't caught up to the current state of things, or they're indeed actually infiltrated, which would be, in my opinion, very unsurprising. And they want to make it out as though anyone who's reporting on symptoms that are perfectly bona fide and legitimate, which you're detailing with exquisite precision, are phantasms of the mind, that they indicate some kind of mental illness or disturbance. And that, of course, becomes a cover, a camouflage, a concealment of the actual ongoing social experiments in manipulating human behavior.
I think it's the latter, and there's evidence for that, because the person who founded I think it's the Canadian Psychiatric Association, was, I always forget his first names, but this is it James Ewan Cameron. He was a person involved with MK Ultra, so his surname I think is Cameron, but so he was one of the scientists who conducted MK Ultra, I think, in the US, and was I think also one of these Operation Paperclip Nazi types. And then he founded the Psychiatric Association in Canada. So of course, you know, anything that these victims would report would be classified as a psychiatric disorder or some sort of fantasy, so that these military black projects are covered up. And I think it was the former chief medical officer of Finland, Dr. Ronnie Kilder. So she was very famous, very well known, and she blew the whistle about human implanting and these sort of weapon attacks. And she said that the DSM is specifically written to cover up the symptoms of directed energy weapon attacks and non-consensual implanting. And also there's a third...
I find that 100% plausible. I'm not surprised at all. That was my conjecture. Indeed, look, from an epidemiological perspective, are you aware of patterns where this is taking place? It appears to me there's a concentration in the UK. You mentioned Warwick, Oxford, was it Leeds? three universities that are fairly prominent in the UK as being leaders in this field. It's really applied psychology and you know, using a modern technology to manipulate behavior. Are you aware of clusters of victims that have shown up that would be indicative that we could do you know, diagrams of the population where these are occurring to sort out, well, what's taking place? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I think the connection is very weak where I am, but I can hear you fine. I hope you can hear as well. So yes, they kind of are. There kind of are clusters. There are victims in all countries, but the number of victims is extremely high in some. And Germany is one of these countries where the number of victims is.
Germany is one of the countries. Germany is one of the countries. Yeah, they may be attempting to interfere with our interview. This would be unsurprising in the extreme as well. Were you saying Germany is one of the countries where there's a high number?
Germany. Exactly. So Germany is one, and the reason for that, it's not surprising because we've now found out that Germany to this day is a colony of the Allies. The old laws of the Allies still apply, and these were the old laws de facto still under occupation. So it goes without saying that the Allies will use Germany as their colony to do experimentation. Now, also, there's very many victims along the Five Eyes surveillance network. So this is the US, Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. There are a lot of victims. And it seems to be that these type of crimes emanate from the Five Eyes network. I call it the Five Eyes crime syndicate, actually. You know,
that makes perfect sense too, because the Five Eyes is being utilized by one nation when conducting surveillance on their own citizens would violate their nation's laws. They go to another member of Five Eyes to conduct their surveillance on their behalf, just as the UK was solicited to conduct surveillance within the United States on Donald Trump. It was a very elaborate procedure where Christopher Steele, who was the author of this salacious dossier, has now admitted under oath in a UK court that he was hired by Hillary Clinton to write the dossier to trash Trump, which was used to obtain the FISA surveillance, where the corruption involved here is of a magnitude that simply boggles the mind of decent law-abiding citizens to think that the leading investigative law enforcement agency and the leading institution for the administration of justice in the United States, which would be the FBI and the Department of Justice respectively, should be so profoundly corrupt and be abusing their positions to promote a political agenda is simply shocking. So that Five Eyes should be the framework here, frankly, is unsurprising in the extreme and makes perfect sense.
Yeah, there's further evidence from the former chief of Intel in Austria. So his name was Gerd Polly, and he went public in an article, in an interview with Sputnik News, and he said that German intelligence is run by NSA and GCHQ. So German intelligence is run by Anglo-American Intel.
That's very significant. I can't believe that Allied laws for Germany that were applicable in the aftermath of the war should remain in force today. That's astonishing in and of itself, Elizabeth. All by itself, that's remarkable.
So this is actually, for those people who are interested, this is the article I'm referring to. It says Germany is still occupied by the US. This is ex-chief of Austrian intelligence. And it says that US intelligence agencies have full access to Germany and can do there whatever they want, as if the European country was still occupied by Western allied powers. Former head of Austrian Civil Intelligence Service, BTV, said. Now, here's a direct quote. He said, Germany was an occupied country, and considering the activities of the intelligence services of the allied countries on German soil, it still is. This is Gerd R. Polly. Now, he further down names specifically, hang on, where's the paragraph here? So Polly named the US National Security Agency and the British Government Communication Headquarters, GCHQ, that is the British NSA, as the primary intelligence services operating in Germany. Both are currently investigated for mass surveillance, according to the expert. So this is it. So this is what the Austrian head of Intel says. And one thing he does not say, which is what other investigators uncovered, that yes, indeed, according to the laws, the original laws were never actually lifted. So we are still occupied in Germany. And this is where I'm now. And this is where I'm being tortured right now on the orders of MI6.
Has there been retaliation against him for making that disclosure?
I don't think so. I have been continuously tortured since January 2016. And at the time, I wasn't even an investigator into these matters. So at the time, what had happened, I had left Oxford. I tried to launch a startup, which was sabotaged. Then I came to Switzerland and I was trying to launch a consultancy in Switzerland. And as soon as I tried to launch that, they started to physically assault me, starting January 2016. And in May 2016, I took GCHQ, MI6, and MI5 to court in the London High Court. And so it was since then that I've experienced several assassination attempts, non-stop torture, physical assaults. For me, it's just all the same. But there are some peaks at Christmas and so on.
Well, the Austrian intelligence chief would make an excellent witness on your behalf, it would appear to me.
Absolutely.
Has there been any retaliation against him for making those revelations? Has he been hit himself? Do you know?
I don't know yet. That is a very good idea to get in touch with him. So far, I haven't actually dared to reach that high. But then again, I am collecting expert affidavits. So we do have a couple already collected. And if I may just show to your viewers, some of whom I know are very, very high profile.
Please do, yes.
Because for those people who are wondering what the hell I and others plan to do about all this, well, it is a fact that every single victim I know, or pretty much all of them, have already reported it to the police. And it has turned out that the police is under orders to cover this up, to put people into forced psychiatric detention, where they are usually given against their will some sort of neurotoxins, which totally, mentally disables them. So this is how the system has been set up. So the police is of no use. In fact, the police is entirely in deep capture by this crime syndicate. So the only last place where we can go is really the courts. So we have already contacted politicians. I think all the politicians were already contacted in 2007 and haven't done anything for the last 10, 11 years. So we have given up on the politicians as well. And now the courts are the last place where we can actually stop this. And what I mean with this is actually a global Holocaust, because the chip torture is just the kind of concentration camp bit of it. What this entire program is building up towards is really a mass extermination, so population reduction, according to the plans of the UN.
Would it be a lot simpler to use other techniques of population reduction? Wars, famines, pestilence, biological, chemical attack, that you can take out very large numbers? I mean, it seems to me doing it person by person, including this electronic surveillance, is just too sophisticated for the mass depopulation they want to effectuate. I think it's very important that they take subjects like you and determine what they can do, the limits of human manipulation, as it were, by high technology. But it would seem to me that cannot be the objective of this program, meaning mass depopulation can't be the objective of this high-tech program involving persons such as yourself.
Well, it's kind of, yes, you're kind of right that there's more going on, but it also is, so when we look at the, sorry to call it that, but when one looks at the attrition rate of victims in this program, victims eventually kill themselves because that is the only way.
Inducing suicide.
Yeah, so induced suicide, also voluntary suicide, if one can call it that, just to get out of the torture.
Right. No, I get it.
But
and in that case, it might be they're targeting what they regard as intellectual leaders, persons who are creative in their thinking, who are not, conventional and thereby subject to manipulation by the mass media, which of course is completely under control of the intel agencies whether you're talking about the United States or the UK or Canada or other of, for example, the Five Eyes countries.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there are other things going on. So the genocide aspect is mostly covered by the directed energy weapons. So, for example, all throughout every single night since January 2016, I'm being gunned by so-called pulsed energy projectiles. Now, these are high energy pulses that are extremely painful. They really rip through tissue and they cause bruising. They are extremely painful in the bones. They damage bone matter as well. But it's pretty impossible to block them. So I think one would need something like 12 centimeters of solid steel to block them out. Otherwise, they can easily pass through 6 to 8 layers of sheet metal. So the standard sheet metal that one can buy.
Well, let me give you an illustration of very high-powered weapons of this kind. In Iraq, you have a whole family in an automobile and instantly turned to ash. I mean, everyone, their body is disintegrated. There's nothing but a pile of ash after the application. For a millisecond of one of these devices, I mean, it's absolutely stunning what they can do with these very high-tech devices in terms of eradicating matter, basically. I mean, particularly biological, but also, I mean, the automobile itself, too, was turned to ash.
Exactly. And one of the things that has been reported to me, so I also do consulting for victims, and one victim from Canada reported witnessing drones that were machine gunning with pulsed energy projectiles entire neighborhoods at night. So he said that in the middle of the night, he went out to have a smoke, and that's when he saw the drones. And he said these are kind of silent devices, maybe emitting a silent humming sound, but they were hovering above his community and clearly shooting at people as they were sleeping. So that has been reported from Canada. It has been reported from the UK once as well, independently. But I think aside from that, people don't even need drones. You can just do the same thing just from satellites.
Yeah, when you talk about shooting, you don't mean actual bullets. You mean perhaps these little devices that are like birdshot to implant them in the bodies?
I know. What I mean when I say machine gunning, I mean pulsed energy projectiles. So these are bundles of energy. This is a waveform. Okay. And it really feels like a shot. It can bruise as well. Yeah. And they also have something called pencil beams. So there, the bruising is the size of the tip of a pencil. You know, the blunt part of the pencil. Yeah. That's the kind of diameter that one has.
Yeah.
They're also larger pulses, so they can have any pulse shape. But it really feels like being machine gunned because it's kind of like a Star Wars version of it. You know, where
yes. As though you're at the end of a laser, and essentially you are at the end of a laser. I mean, it's.
Exactly.
Stunning stuff. I know, Elizabeth, you have a number of articles or studies you want to share today, so I'm inviting you to take that opportunity now.
So one of the things I would like to start with explaining pretty much what the plan is for 2019, because 2017 and 18 were all about finding out what the hell is going on and getting the evidence and getting it all together, finding the victims, finding out what's happening. So now we have a fairly good idea what is happening. We know that it's these three things. It's directed energy weapons, it's chip implants and miscellaneous bioimplants. And the third is the application of neurotechnology. This is when the first two are being used to modify human perception. So what I plan to do about this, after having discovered that the police is completely captured and after discovering that politicians are unwilling to do anything about it, is I am working on supporting court cases, and I'm launching my own court case in the UK in 2019. And I should say that for me personally, and also for many, many victims, this is really the last resort. And for many people, it's the last resort before suicide because they have been tortured so intensely and so brutally, and their livelihood has been destroyed, their income has been destroyed. Many people had to flee their homes and move repeatedly.
Their marriages or support groups, anyone who's a friend of theirs driven away, so they're isolated from social interaction.
Exactly. So we are really talking at the very end of a very, very brutal covert war. So what I discovered when I went into the courts in 2016 is that two judges were genuinely shocked and had no idea that this is going on. Now, the third one I strongly suspect was a plant because he threw out my court case claiming it was frivolous or vexatious.
Frivolous
Yeah.
or vexatious? How absurd. I mean, that's ridiculous on its face.
It is, but that is also the standard sentence with which all the cases are being thrown out of the so-called Investigatory Powers Tribunal. This is the secret court set up to cover up these crimes.
That's right, that's right. And it's secret because otherwise what they want to conceal would be revealed. So they have to suppress revelations about these secret programs secretly itself, lest the word get out to the public.
Exactly. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm appealing, first of all, to experts from all walks of life to write expert testimonies, expert affidavits. And there are many, many experts who could testify about different aspects of this. So number one is the directed energy weapons. People from the medical field can testify about the chip implants or certainly the effects of the chip implants and so on and so on. So what I will do in 2019 is, and I would like to start today, is put out these appeals for expert affidavits. And what I'm looking for, I can show you right here. There are a couple that people have already written. So this is my website here, Stop007, and if stop007.org. And if people scroll down to the research library here, there is a set of expert affidavits. There's first of all proof, a patent list, market analyses about the size of the directed energy weapon market, then plans how these chip implants will be put together to make an internet of things in our body and so on and so on. But further down here, under high profile affidavits, I have listed the few that I already have. One of them is from Dr. Ronnie Kill, the former chief medical officer of Finland. This is actually just an article, but it's so powerful. And she presented it at the conference that it can be used. There's an affidavit by William Binney, the former technical director of NSA, one by Ted Gunderson, former head of the LA FBI, and so on. And these affidavits are great. Some, for example, William Binney's has been submitted for one particular court case, but because he is testifying to these facts here under oath, the same thing can be used in other court cases as well, because the facts that he's testifying about do not change.
As an expert witness in particular.
Absolutely. So now what I'm trying to do is I basically appeal for people, if it's experts who know something about this, be it mass surveillance or gang stalking or non-consensual implanting or any of these things, that they please write an affidavit. And it's possible to write generic affidavits. This is, for example, what Ted Gunderson has done. He's not addressing it to one particular court case. He just makes an affidavit in general, a sworn affidavit. Now, this is extremely powerful. And to make something like that, the only thing one needs to do is state one's name and address, say that this is sworn under the pains and penalties of perjury, and that this facts are correct, and just numbered paragraphs, and that's it. And at the very end, just sign, basically. Certify that this is under oath, and ideally sign it before a witness, a person entitled to administer oaths, because then that is pretty much kryptonite for the court system. So what I'm trying to do in 2019 is really expedite the rush towards court cases and into court. And the experts I'm asking to write affidavits about this aspect, and the victims I am inviting to write affidavits about what they actually have suffered. Now, what I did in 2018 is I made an affidavit template that is specifically tailored to these crimes. And these crimes are extraordinary because they have such a large number of different types of crimes incorporated in them. This could be computer hacking, housebreaking, car sabotage, assassination attempts, the killing of pets, and many, many other things. So these type of crimes do not fit into the normal, criminal investigations that we have today. They're just too big. And it's also too hard for these victims to testify in writing about these crimes, because just writing up what has happened to them takes, literally the size of a novel, the size of War and Peace. So it is very, very hard. So I had to come up with something where they can testify about every aspect of this as quickly as possible. And for this purpose, I've devised a type of tick box survey And if people go to my website, I just would like to explain how this works, because I'm hoping that people sign up to this and maybe other investigators emulate it for similar crimes. I've developed here, so the very first link, the final affidavit form, takes people to this website. There's a video that explains the affidavit, and the affidavit itself is down here. And there's extensive explanatory notes. So the explanatory notes are a legal document with my signature that outline how these victim affidavits are being used, what they are intended for. But the affidavit itself is down here, and it's a 94-page tick box survey. So the very first part is the name and the address filled in by the victim. And every victim chooses themselves an 8-digit code that is entered on the top of the affidavit and then down in the footer down here. And every page has this 8-digit code as the only recognizable signature of whose affidavit it is. Now, inside the affidavit, there's an anonymous part, which is just a tick box survey. So people can testify about stalking and street theater and many other things, just indicating when did the offense start, so month and year. Then the second column is the frequency with which this offense is suffered. Is it continuous, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, or has it only occurred a set number of times? And then the final column is, do they have evidence or do they not have evidence? Now, the entire purpose behind this affidavit template is the following. First of all, I mean, if I just flick through at very high speed, you can just see how many, every line with its specific number is a particular offense. This could be credit card theft or you know, fraud by companies, breach of contract, many other things. And the key is that when victims start filling out this affidavit, reading it vertically within the same affidavit, it's already clear as day that something extraordinary is happening, because the normal person would never experience so many different types of crimes within their lifetime all at once, sometimes within the same year. So it's clear that a different type of crime is happening. This is point number one. Point number two is the frequency with which crimes are suffered are absolutely insane for the victims of the intelligence agencies. So this is one way to prove these crimes. The second way to prove these crimes is to have many affidavits side by side and compare. Because the typical victim of the intelligence agencies would have something like housebreaking, gang stalking, sometimes directed energy weapon attacks, non-consensual implanting, and so on. And it all follows one set pattern. When one compares many victim affidavits and sees what has been testified to, it becomes clear that there are larger programs at play here. So this is the basis of the affidavit. Now, the entire purpose of this is so that individual victims can download other people's affidavits and prove that what they are testifying about is also what people around the world are testifying to under oath. This is a very high standard. Now, to protect victim identities, what I have done is I have split the first page and the last page. So these are the two pages that contain their photograph, their name, their address, and their signature. And when victims send me this, the affidavit, they need to send the affidavit filled out, signed under oath before witness, and the witness needs to sign it and stamp it. And they need to send me a copy of their photo ID with the serial number blanked out. I then look at it and say, okay, this is really the signature of the person who sent me this. I can see that there's an ID card that goes with it. That's a very high standard. Then I strip the private information and I leave the anonymous tick box survey in the middle, and I upload that to my website. So 2 people have already returned these affidavits, and I can show what that looks like. So here, first victim affidavit submitted. Okay, so this is now the returned affidavits. And then eventually what people will find is this affidavit with just the serial number. So only I and only the person who filled out the affidavit know who this belongs to. This is to protect their privacy. And otherwise I only state their country and what in what year did the targeting start. Oh, I just realized, oh, here it is. Okay. So the first page then shows that this person has, you know, suffered all sorts of stuff. So we can see that they are the victim of intrusive surveillance, neighborhood terror, their landlord is involved, they suffered housebreaking, stalking, you know, attacks driving, crimes traveling abroad, computer hacking, and so on and so on, torture and life destruction, and many, many other things. And reading these affidavits in detail, one can just look at what has been marked in each section. So, you know, a person who has suffered something similar in the US can download this affidavit and then take it to the police or to court and use it to prove that this is actually going on. So I'm encouraging victims to fill out these things, and my goal is to combine these two things. So my goal for 2019 is to automatize this process, to have experts testifying in a generic form. And this means not directed at a specific court case, but just testifying in general under oath about the crimes or the irregularities that they have witnessed. Then have the affidavits from the victims. I'm also teaching people how to make their own court bundles. And the idea is that if a new victim comes along, or if a victim would like to go to court, they can just download the affidavits. They can download other victim affidavits, put them all into one court bundle very quickly, write up their own case, write up the timeline, and go straight into court. So
this is all sensational, Katherine, absolutely sensational. I believe you're doing for this electronic targeting what Edward Snowden did for mass surveillance of the American people, especially through the social media, and what Julian Assange is doing by revealing the deep state operations that have been concealed by the use of, you know, private servers, for example, from the American people, which is now coming to light, where the whole Russia hoax, of course, has been exposed now as having been an elaborate charade, a Hillary Clinton DNC operation. What you're talking about is devastating to individual human beings, unlike the political consequences of those I've been describing heretofore. And I think that places your efforts on an even higher plane in terms of their significance for the quality of life in the UK, the USA, and even around the world.
Well, you know, it's funny you would mention Snowden and Assange. I also think that they too are victims of these types of attacks, I'm pretty sure. I think it would require an extraordinary, not existent amount of restraint from the intelligence agencies not to assault Julian Assange while he's confined in the embassy.
Yes, he's in a specific location 24/7. He has no options about it. He would be a perfect stationary target, in essence, for these kinds of operations. And obviously an individual who represents a tremendous threat to the deep state and to the national security apparatus of the UK, the USA, the Mossad, which of course works hand in glove with these other agencies. In fact, all US raw intelligence goes through Tel Aviv. The Israelis know what's going on in the US before the American authorities know.
Yeah, I also suspect that traditionally, and this is something I always emphasize, traditionally, the headquarters of the cartel has been Switzerland. And this is because Switzerland is the Vatican vaults. It has huge underground bunker complexes. Pretty much the entire country is one bunker complex. And traditionally, this has been the home of the Vatican crime operation. This is where the loot from the Second World War was brought to. This is right at the center. So I also suspect that in addition to Tel Aviv, there has to be a HQ in Switzerland as well.
That's very significant, very significant. Katherine, we have about 10 minutes that remains here for our conversation today. What would you like the public to know that you haven't already addressed? I think you've been very comprehensive. I think creating these opportunities for individuals to submit their own testimonials by the form of sworn affidavits is sensational. I think you're moving in the right direction. The question becomes ultimately the integrity of the courts. Is there a modicum of integrity that remains in the judicial system to enable the truth to emerge and some kind of justice to be administered, punishing those responsible for these grotesque abuses and compensating those who have been the victims?
I think so. I think there is. And I say that based on quantitative numbers. And this is the following. Number one, my personal experience has been that I stood pro se before 3 different judges. And the first 2 were exactly behaving like they should behave as judges. I never saw anything wrong with them. They were happy going forward and looking at this. In fact, they specifically said that cases like these need to be looked at in the courts. And then the third one threw out my case and called it frivolous and vexatious. And in fact, he said that there was not even a claim to strike out because I hadn't written the specific words, particulars of claim on a piece of paper. So I gave my papers other titles, but you know, this is disregarding the fact that his previous 2 colleagues had no problem understanding what the claim was and what I was asking for. So anyway, now my personal...
Would you be able to resubmit, put in the words particulars of claims and overcome that hurdle? It would seem to me that's so trivial and artificial and clearly manipulative.
It was. The real hurdle for me so far was the proof. And this is it's extremely hard to prove these directed energy weapon attacks. Even I as a physicist struggle to measure these attacks. That is the problem. Now, one of the things I wanted to present on your show as kind of a premiere, pretty much, is how victims can prove chip torture. So in the past, maybe I can show that. If people go to my YouTube channel, which is called Stop 007, I'm already publicizing one type of how these assaults can be proven. So let me just share my screen, because I want all your viewers to have the tools necessary should they become victim or should they want to inform themselves. They know where to look for information. So this is my YouTube channel here. And if people scroll down, there's something here under appeals and evidence. There's something called Nazi implant detection. This is now a set of 8 videos where I'm using a bug detector and I'm showing how to use a standard bug detector to measure the chips. So in this video, I hold this to my head and I show how the bug detector would show absolutely nothing, but then light up as I'm lifting it to my head. And I'm doing exactly the same thing. So it takes a bit of time to actually find the chips, but eventually this bug detector lights up. And I have made a set of, I think, these 8 videos where I'm scanning systematically my head, I'm scanning my legs, and at every point, eventually, when this bug detector hones in, this is probably the demonstration effect. I probably have to skip ahead. So people can literally learn how to prove this, how to find the debtors. So
there it's lighting up.
Exactly, so it's sliding up. So this is one method. Now the other method to prove these chip implants is to go and visit dermatologists, okay? So those dermatologists, especially the ones who are specialized in cosmetic surgery of the face, these people very often use laser scalpels so they can recognize laser surgery scars. Now, these chip implants are put in with laser surgery. So laser scalpel would make a cut in the skin. Sometimes this doesn't even bleed because the blood coagulates. A chip would be planted in, and then the tissue is sealed using tissue glue. It's very, very quick. Now, the scars a dermatologist can find, and I have 2 dermatologist certificates testifying each to about half a dozen of scars. So this is another thing. Now, the third one, and this is now pretty much the premiere, I don't think this has been shown yet on anywhere. So there was a private investigator in the US who used to do these tests, but it is possible to use thermal cameras to prove these chips if these chips have been turned up very, very high so that they are generating a lot of heat. Now, what happened is that before Christmas, I made contact with a doctor who promised to help me to read these scans that victims send me, so MRIs, CT scans, and X-rays. And we had a meeting, it was last Monday at 3 o'clock, and 24 hours before Sunday at exactly 3 o'clock, the chips in my knee, which I had previously measured using the bug detector, were turned on and heated to a ludicrously high temperature, causing agonizing pain and pretty much crippling me. Now, what I did is I photographed this using a thermal camera that I own. It's called the FLIR C2, and I would like to show those images.
Please do. Yes, by all means.
So this is, sorry, let me just share my screen. Let's start with this one here. Okay, so this is now my knee the night before. What you can see is my two legs as I'm photographing down. And the right knee, you can see how hot it is. So here's the temperature scale. So black and purple is cold. This is what you can see here on the bed around it. And then red and white is very, very hot.
Wow.
And
wow. Wow.
So this is what you see. This is kind of asymmetric, focused on the inner side of my knee.
Sure.
Now there's a bit of heat here, but because my knees were together, they were touching before I took the photograph.
Yes.
So they got here.
Yeah, that's
So
derivative. That's transference from your right knee.
Exactly. So now the key is the surface temperature still is 36.4, but the camera doesn't give distance. So it's an approximate value. What we work with is the relative temperature. So here I've got something like 36.4, and this green is over here. So it's, you know, several degrees difference, but the key is that the heat stayed for over 24 hours, just 48 hours. Now the question is,
I imagine this was being induced to inhibit you from going to meet with the physician who offered to help read. They were trying to incapacitate you from physically incapacitate you from making that meeting.
Absolutely, that was the plan, and I cannot explain how painful it is when the tissue is literally cooked from the inside. So the chip temperatures itself are much above 40 degrees, and I think it's about 40 when proteins start to denature and to break. So, you know, they are causing severe tissue damage doing this.
Were you able to make the meeting?
I did, yes. He
must have been astonished by this image right here.
Yeah, well, you know, this is basically it. I didn't have the images ready at the time. I showed him the camera, so he hasn't seen this yet. I showed him all the other chip implants. But what was amazing is that I managed to use this to get even more information. So I'm not sure if I switch images, if you can still see it, but let me just flick through the following images. So what I did then, this is an ice pack. This is literally a frozen bag of beans, I think, under a towel.
Yeah.
And I put this on my knee. Now, if I switch the image, let's see. Can you see the thermal image now? Or do you still see the photograph?
I'm still seeing the photograph.
Okay. Then I have to do individual shares. Okay, let me then switch back. So this is what the towel looks like on the thermal camera. Okay, so the towel you saw, you can see it's ice cold. It's down to 11 degrees here. From the distance, it's actually ice cold, but it's the calibration problem. Now, what I did is, as soon as I took off this thing from my knee, okay, hang on, let me share my screen. It's a bit awkward. This one here, okay. So you can see, as soon as I take this off, parts of my knee have been cooled down. However, the area with the chips is immediately heating. It's back to what it was.
Yes,
so the heat is coming from the inside. But
listen,
now
this has to do lasting, enduring damage to your knee. I mean, it's impossible not.
It does. Yes, it does. And ultimately what it does, it cooks tissue around the chips and leads to calcifications. And calcifications is exactly what the doctors call these chip implants on the scans, because they do look like calcifications.
Of course, that's arthritis. They're inducing arthritis in you artificially.
Exactly. And I strongly suspect that a lot of old people are being tortured with this specifically, you know, and I'm also suspecting that a lot of the diseases we think are diseases are actually these biosensors and bioimplants. But the smoking gun, and this is why I'm saying this, these thermal cameras are very expensive. But for those people, so I'm talking $400 to $500. But for those people who are suffering regular pain, it really pays doing this experiment that I have done now, and having a look. Sorry, maybe I can zoom in some more. So this is again
perfectly visible. You're good. Yeah.
So the key is that when I kept doing this experiment with the ice pack, I zoomed in on my knee and I could suddenly see distinct chips. So if you look here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chips. Definitely. And this is what you can do. So if you are suffering continuous pain, this is why I'm saying these thermal cameras are very good, have very high resolution. You can just borrow them or buy one and return them after 2 weeks, hint, hint, if you can't afford it. But you can take these images, and if it's chip implants, you can actually make them visible.
Is there a way we can neutralize the chips? There ought to be a technology that would allow us to neutralize a chip. We discover them and we neutralize them from the outside of our body without having to undertake surgical removal, which of course would be the alternative.
Yeah, well, this is when it gets tricky. I suspect that these chips are a type of solid state device, which are very robust. And I also suspect that these chips were originally developed for astronauts. And this means that they have been built to withstand extreme electromagnetic and magnetic fields and everything you can think of. So people have reported about using electromagnetic pulses, but I'm not sure how successful they are. And because I don't know any results, I can't actually advocate.
How remarkable that your field of research should actually coincide to the study of the phenomena to which you're being subjected.
Well, that's kind of, it goes, well, it's not that coincidental, because most of physics is involved somehow in technology, you know. I was just lucky that I had to partially teach this stuff.
Katherine, you're a sensational human being, a dedicated scientist, a principled citizen seeking to expose modern forms of terrorism on the population of the world. It's shocking and dismaying, but I applaud you. I am so impressed. I look forward to future interviews. Is there anything you'd like to add as a final remark today as we part?
I would like to appeal to everybody. This is lawyers, doctors, and academics, and police officers, anybody in our society, to have the courage in 2019 to stand up and to help us, because we have come so far being tortured. If we had a little bit of help, we can shut these crimes down next year. We can really do that.
This is Jim Fetzer, the host of The Real Deal, thanking Dr. Elizabeth Horton for being here. I admire her beyond words. You will be hearing more about her research and this devastating phenomenon in the future. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you.